All right, so welcome back in today. We're going to be diving into kind of the future of base money, Luna, what UST could be or can be in the future. Could algorithmic play a big role in kind of the future of cryptocurrency overall? My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Joining me today is Jordi Alexander, who is the Chief Investment Officer over at Selini Capital. Jordi, of course, has been in a VC fund. You've done a ton of DeFi protocol projects. I've watched you on several shows, Jordi, so you always seem to have some good insights. So I thought, hey, let's get you on the show and really kind of dive deep a little bit. But hey, welcome to the show. We appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, Jordi, between Selini Capital, just to kind of understand from a framework standpoint, what do you guys focus in on in terms of, is it all VC or are you doing some, traditional investment class investments as well, where you're just going into projects? Where do you guys kind of run with?
Yeah, we do the full spectrum. We do trading, algorithmic trading, a lot of prediction trading, arbitrage trading,
Yeah.
and we do a lot of DeFi as well. So we're involved quite deeply in DeFi. We do a lot of yield farming, and it really allows us to understand the space and participate in the protocols and provide liquidity. And that's the only time where you really understand how these things work and how
Mm-hmm.
they don't work, sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get in because I think a lot of our audience, they push us to talk about Luna quite a bit. Over the past year, Luna at one time was a somewhat of a wonder kid within the crypto community. The idea, the vision of what Do Kwon had placed out there was pretty dynamic, and I think it was alluring to a lot of people who were looking at investing in it. Whether you were looking at it on a short run or doing something on a long run aspect, the whole concept around the VC community that really kind of supported his vision. You had some pretty major VC money that came in through Luna. So I'm always kind of curious, how do companies like that, Selini Capital included, how does a company like that not see through what actually happened over at Luna?
I mean, we did see through it on our side. We really understood that it was a binary game where either this potentially goes to zero or it does extremely well. The
Yeah.
chance of it doing extremely well is small, but if it does manage to somehow take off, then the upside is very big. So I think a lot of the players either didn't understand the game, or maybe a few of them did, but they were putting some chips in and say, like, if this does work out,
Sure.
this concept of, we need a stable coin that is not centralized, we can kind of independently control it without any governments being able to interfere, is such a powerful thing. And Do
Mm-hmm.
Kwon at the same time was such a charismatic and strong leader on the business development side. I think what they lacked ultimately is understanding the pure game theory and dynamics of the project, and understanding that when you're trying to make base money, you really have to be very careful about the senior age and where that ends up and whether that's sustainable. And I think with Luna, unfortunately, we got the downside where it went to zero because ultimately the asset liability mismatch could not be controlled.
Yeah, and I know Arrington Capital was a big, Mike Arrington, a former tech journalist, has been in Silicon Valley for quite some time. And I mean, to me, Mike probably looked at it to your point, and a lot of Silicon Valley investors, I think, do that. I myself have invested in many startups that have gone to zero. And you kind of know that it's that kind of risk in the beginning. And in many cases, you're buying into usually the founders or the vision of what the founders have, and it kind of brings you in. So I have that question asked to me all the time. I just kind of was curious. You guys were on the outside looking in and kind of pointing at Luna as being a potential problem here, like you just mentioned. When you look at the overall aspect of resurrecting the project, do you think this was a good strategy or still just one of those scenarios where a project just has so much, not only community behind it, but also just founders that just feel like their idea is good and they just won't quit? What are your
I think
thoughts
it's
on that?
fine. I mean, ultimately, they had their main idea, which was UST. That was the entire problem that they were trying to
Sure.
solve, was creating this money. At the same time, what they ended up doing is creating an ecosystem around their blockchain. And at the end, when UST failed, that ecosystem was still vibrant enough and there was a community enough behind it that I think it was quite a reasonable decision to say, well, let's at least keep the blockchain, like Do Kwon said, there's more to Luna than UST,
Yeah,
and let's keep
yeah.
the founders involved that are building on this blockchain. So I ultimately completely changed what Luna is, even though it's the same name. It is no longer designed to be around money or stable coins or this kind of main idea. I would say it's an alternative to Ethereum,
Hmm.
much like Phantom and Avalanche are.
Yeah.
And I would put it towards the Phantom side. It's a bit more small and niche when you take out all the UST component, but there's still something there.
Yeah, I was looking at their launch here. I was just looking at Do Kwon's threads. He's been doing a lot of retweets on, mostly, he hasn't really communicated a lot to the community, but a lot of it has been about the launch of Luna 2.0 on many of the, the exchanges. Obviously, Bybit, Gate, Binance is jumped in. So I think the fact that this has come back to life in essence, to me is still a question mark, especially around algorithmic. When you look at algorithmic stablecoins or just algorithmic cryptocurrencies in general, and let's talk about base money because you kind of mentioned this in the beginning. Explain the difference and how something like these could be targeting to become base money, and what is base money? Does Bitcoin kind of flow into this? Explain how this lays out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is very critical to understand because a lot of crypto projects are kind of in the process of trying to become base money, and it's such a difficult path that those usually don't end up working. So base money basically means that people are willing to work and get paid in that currency and not change it into something else. Like if I'm playing Axie and I get Axie, but then I want to change it into dollars, then
Yeah,
AXS, for example, is not base money, right? So imagine that the world has stuff. There's real stuff that people make. Like Elon says, if you don't make stuff, there's no stuff. You can't just
yeah.
make coins. So there's a limited number of stuff in the world. And then money is the things that can get freely translated and changed into the stuff. So we have, fiat currencies. That's one
Hmm.
option. We have gold. That's like another kind of option. I would say Bitcoin is a new option that people are hoping will work. It's not really at the point yet in which people are happy to get paid in Bitcoin and will never change their Bitcoin. Maybe some people are, some maxis are. Eventually, I think it's possible that a worldwide community of millions of people in the United States, millions of people in Asia, and different places do end up saying, "Look, I will be happy to just work for Bitcoin and I can buy enough stuff with it that this is base money." But it is a high bar and it will take a long time to get there. At the same time, you have a lot of cryptocurrencies that have thought it's easy to become base money. Like Bitcoin Cash says, like, well, we're just better technology. We have a bigger
Hmm.
block. Or, some of the Olympus DAO or some of these other Hex or, obviously UST are other examples of digital currencies that they just give the same spiel, which is, well, Bitcoin is not backed by anything. So
Yeah.
why do we need to be backed by anything? Like it's all the same thing. And if that one works, then ours works, and ours is better because there's this technological improvement somewhere, and they seem to miss how, first of all, how difficult it is to become base money, and secondly, that the questions to ask are not, is this technology as good as Bitcoin's technology, but rather ask, is this capable of producing seigniorage that is fair, that is distributed enough where society at large will accept it? And
Hmm.
it's 99.9% no is the answer.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is something we talk about on our channel a lot, and that is this whole network effect. It's that trustless community or the trust-based community that really kind of evolves around cryptocurrency. For the most part, I would still kind of say that Bitcoin is probably outside of the true stable coins, and really, at least for me, I look at USDC as kind of the one base money, denominated that we trade on here daily. Occasionally USDT, but in many cases, to your point, I will trade out of USDT in many cases for a USDC. So I understand what you're getting at, but when you get to a point where cryptocurrency starts to become more accepted, both from a critical mass acceptance standpoint or through regulation, different kind of things that obviously can affect. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but with the network effect occurring, especially around Bitcoin, do you feel like any altcoins that are coming up through the ranks right now, knowing what happened to Luna, understanding the network effect that really Luna had in place, but kind of lost their way. Do any altcoins have the potential of getting into the base money zone?
Um, there's a tiny chance, but I just want to correct you, if you allow me, that USDC and USDT, they represent dollars and the base money is dollars. So they're not
Hmm.
themselves base money. They're just saying we have the base money in the bank and we'll just kind of give you a coupon for it. So yeah, dollars are base money. And as long as they
Yeah,
do, in fact, keep it like they say they do, then that's totally legitimate. And
yeah,
also over collateralized algorithmic stablecoins like DAI is also not trying to become base money. They're basically saying that, well, you're being backed by Ethereum that is in this vault, which we will sell
exactly.
off
Yeah,
$2. So it's still kind of backed by dollars in a way. So that's totally fine. The problem becomes when somebody like UST says, this is money and you don't have to convert it. There's no dollars backing anything. There's nothing backing it.
yeah. Like a US
So
dollar or any monetary system of most nation states, which are all backed by, in most cases, trusts outside the gold standards. So, do you think there's any cryptocurrency that could get there to a base money level in the future?
in the far future, it's possible if there is a blockchain, for example, Ethereum or like one of the other blockchains that becomes so popular that it is being used by 100 million people in the world, and
Right.
those people really trust it and they use it for a lot of things in their life. It is
Mhm.
possible that at that stage, those people do say, I am willing to accept this as end payment for my labor because it is so ubiquitous. But we really have to get to that level of adoption, and that's many years away.
Yeah, for sure. I still think, for me, I guess Bitcoin would still be my base money project because if I take Bitcoin as payment, often I do not sell it, I just keep it. So to me, it's that kind of value for long-term investment. Obviously, value moves up and down. It's not as it's obviously more volatile than a traditional, fiat dollar, but still, I look at it as, at least in my particular case, I guess it's probably different from for everyone's perspective. Is Bitcoin acts like base money to me. If though I could start paying in Bitcoin more often, then I think that kind of scenario really starts to play into it. All right, so I want to thank our sponsors today, and that is Emrit.io. When you're thinking about helium mining, this is the company to maybe take a look at because it is one thing that they're approaching, and that is the ease and process to actually start and getting going on mining. So right now, you can actually order a device, which that's probably one of the biggest things that you face right now on helium miners is the lead time to get one of the miners in and to you. With Emrit, you actually can get the miner very quickly. You order it, you can activate it, and then start mining. You go through a process of setups. I like the fact that one, they're a helium partner, and when you look at partnerships, I think this is a key thing in any kind of project is you need that kind of solidity that kind of connects these big projects with projects like what you're seeing here with Emirates. So one-time hosting fee, this I think is going to really start to ramp up as we see more and more technology lean in on this, including things like 5G, a lot of IoT traffic starting to move in. So the demand for this kind of network architecture is going to be very, very serious. If you're looking at going into Emirate for Business, they can go in and start developing or work with you in developing a fleet for your businesses. So, depending on how you are going about this, whether you're doing it as an individual or maybe as a business, you can look at deploying a whole layer of Emirate devices and going with this same approach. So, and you can kind of see here, there's a lot of different use cases for this from retail franchise systems, public spaces, commercial real estate, property, utility monitoring, all sorts of things that really kind of play into the enterprise side of this. So make sure and check out Emrit.io. I want to thank them for sponsoring this episode. As we see the potential here for altcoins to really start becoming transaction units, being able to use Solana or Avalanche or Cardano, whatever it might be, in true transactions where I'm exchanging goods and services and I'm using that as my base money, at that point, do you feel like, at that point, do you think critical mass will help it get to that point where we'll start to see an altcoin break out and being used like base money?
I think there is this concept of like a local community that can have its own money and buy and sell their goods, like their
Hmm.
NFTs or
Yeah.
whatever is in that small community, like their gaming tokens. But in terms of being able to break out in a big way and being able to use Luna or Solana or one of these altcoins, in a global sense of moving and just taking out your Solana wallet and buying things with that Solana wallet, I can't
Yeah.
see that really happening. So I think altcoins should focus on creating utility and creating what we called like the real world stuff, actually building the
Yep.
stuff, and focus less on trying to buy that stuff by pretending it's money. And I will agree with you that Bitcoin is sort of along that path. I also will, sometimes not sell Bitcoin that is earned, um, and it's far ahead of everything else in the space. But even
Hmm.
Bitcoin is not there. And if we talk about central bank digital currencies, for example, which if you see what they're talking about now at Davos and like all these other
Yep.
forums that they like to have, they do say that Bitcoin is bad. It's not backed by anything. Trust us, because they realize that it is competition to the
Hmm.
CBDC. It's the only competition that exists. And of course, everybody who has a monopoly, they will try and fight tooth and nail to keep that monopoly and not allow anybody else to create base money or even kind of get close to it, because they want to keep the control and the power to issue currencies whenever they feel like it, to be able to increase the supply. And if they go too far and they create a lot of inflation, or if they give too much money to rich corporations, for example, they don't like that there's going to be a counterweight like Bitcoin to keep them in check. So they're very
Yeah.
much against the concept of digital currencies that are not controlled by them.
Yeah, I want to dive in deep on that. A couple of last questions here. When you look at projects like the Luna ecosystem, for you guys, you were able to identify this early on as, a problem. There were certain attributes that kind of identify it that way. For an average person who's just getting into cryptocurrency, and is there like a little checklist that they can kind of do a self test on a project, outside the utility aspect? Because there are certain, altcoins that do have great utility in certain areas. Is there something that you would say, hey, these are the things I look at? Here's my checklist of items that I'm investing in. These are the things I'm looking to kind of help, secure me against a situation like what we saw with Luna.
Yeah, it's very sad that a lot of retail is usually the one gets kind of tricked into all these base coin like Hex, Olympus DAO, like all these type of imitations to Bitcoin. And in this case with Luna, we did see like big institutions also fall to that problem. I think mainly
Right.
because of the very charismatic founder. But in
Hmm.
general, I would say for new people looking at the space, you should either invest in Bitcoin, which understanding that it's in its infancy in terms of becoming this global digital currency, but it has the best shot. And then everything else, we should just look at utility and
Yeah.
really understanding what utility does it bring. And very recently, with this big crash that we've had in the last few weeks, I think a lot of questions have rightfully been asked in terms of, are we just building layers and layers on top of quicksand, where why is this protocol useful? Well, because it lets you farm that one. And why is that one useful to farm? Well, because it
Hmm.
lets you do a transaction on a decentralized exchange. Why do you need a decentralized exchange? Well, there's two tokens, you need to swip to them. Why do
Yeah.
we need those two tokens? And you kind of like go down that path, and you realize that at the bottom, there's a few things that are solid, but not many of them. And sometimes we end up thinking there's utility because we're just relying on comparison points to other things that are also questionable.
Yeah, and we've looked at that, from the gaming side of things. Obviously, the game industry is starting to see some shifts, whether we do see a full-on, shift over to NFTs and kind of the use case scenarios, whether it's play and earn and other aspects around different kind of apps out there. And I would argue that, from an aspect of technology innovation, in many cases, if you go all the way back into the dot bomb era, we saw that kind of scenario at that time as well. So many frivolous type projects, and in that type, we call them companies, that were very frivolous in the essence that they didn't really need to exist, but they existed to serve another purpose, another master. And I do agree with you that we are getting down to a point. Do you feel like these bear markets truly will flush that out? Because we've had a lot of growth in this last, if it wasn't true, a full bull market. But since really 2018, 2019, a lot of innovation, a lot of new growth, but not necessarily a lot of this core growth. Do you think we're set for a lot of these projects to go to zero?
A lot of them might not go to absolute zero, but they might go close to zero. And I think we're already seeing, some 90+% drops in many of these
Mm-hmm.
projects. And it is
Yep.
healthy. It is kind of cleaning up a lot of the excesses. I think the liquidity that's getting drained out of the system slowly over like this year will kind of lead people to think in more sustainable terms. And the founders that I talk to, on a daily and weekly basis, they are starting to change their business model. They're saying, well, let's put all the cards out again. Let's redesign this thing. Let's think about it in a kind of first principles way instead of
Mm-hmm.
just latching on to the latest and greatest, hype idea of how to do things. Games I kind of like because in any scenario, people want entertainment. They want to be able to have fun, and games on the blockchain are going to be potentially an improvement where you can take an existing concept that's extremely popular in the world and add more addictive elements like economies and NFTs and all these other kind of components. So I think the good games will do well. But a lot of the other projects, and especially on the DeFi side, things that have just been kind of copy pasting existing forks, will have to get rethought in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, I think this is going to be an area of, kind of the evolution. We'll look back on it, in a few years and kind of look at it as maybe at a dark time in cryptocurrency in the essence that there were a lot of projects that were being hyped up so much. And then we saw, a significant fall off. And it is really the first time truly since, at least in this last halving, where many of these projects really kind of spun out and they became something. Because if you look back all the way into 2017 or go back even to the origin of Bitcoin, these kind of projects didn't exist. Many of these were all spun out of kind of the core. It's very similar to Silicon Valley, where a lot of those founders spin out of the companies that were started before. And you could take the core of Ethereum and probably look around and say, oh, well, there's 5 founders right there that kind of helped start other protocols in that direction. So I would agree with you in that direction. All right, so final question here on Luna, and that is Luna 2, is there enough utility there for it to make it out of its situation right now? Do Kwon's got a ton of problems coming at them. In general, the fact that it has kind of shifted away from its core mission, do you feel like it has any potential to kind of hold for the future?
It's too early to say. It has a lot of baggage. Like you said, there are legal problems coming right now. We're hearing things out of Korea in terms of investigations happen, like requests for
Yeah,
documents. The community is quite angry. If you look at Twitter, a lot of the responses to any kind of post promoting Luna 2 is extremely angry. A lot of that is kind of driven by how much retail money was lost and how much pain that
right.
created very recently, where they don't
Yeah,
want to see something shilled so soon after, as if we're kind of ignoring that this happened. Um, at the same time, there is the potential to have some competitor to, like I said, the other layer ones that has some value. I think there's
mm-hmm,
1 billion tokens that have been created for Luna 2. There will not be
mm-hmm.
more. And at the current valuation, we're looking around $6-7 billion of fully diluted valuation. That's still a little bit high compared to some of the benchmarks. So I would expect it to come off a little bit, potentially more towards the $2 to $4, $5 range maybe. And at that point, it will just depend on how well the founders keep building on it, and
Yeah,
if they intend to use the brand, if it's going to be a positive brand. Where let's not kid ourselves. At this point, with all the press that Luna has gotten on the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, and you can see Do Kwon's followers have gone from 400,000 to 1 million followers plus.
yep,
There are a lot of eyeballs on Luna, and everybody knows what it is now. So you can potentially take the viewpoint that there's no such thing as bad press,
mm-hmm.
and you can imagine that the name recognition itself will allow some value and some attention to accrue. I'm not sure. I'm quite skeptical, but I wouldn't say that I'm positive it will not keep some value either.
Yeah, I was looking at the CoinMarketCap. You're right. Volume, even though, I mean, fully diluted, sitting at right there at 6 billion. You've got a market cap at a little over 1 billion. Um, Volume, though, down considerably. This is, let me kind of zoom up on that. Down considerably, and we've continued to track this. From a sentiment standpoint, we have our own little power index where we do a lot of social reading to kind of get sentiment on tokens. And Luna was one of the ones we used to keep in our what we call the CPI. We delisted it about a week before when we started to see the fall off, because there were just massive sentiment downward trends during the death spiral, so to speak. And we haven't relisted Luna 2 into the CPI. But again, this is a, what is it, 2808 ranking right now on CoinMarketCap. So it's not, to me, I just don't necessarily, I'm still kind of somewhat of a skeptic and a little bit more conservative. I just don't necessarily see this one kind of pulling out of the dive it's in right now, especially with all the other, additional things that could be coming onto this. So, but it's going to be interesting to see this play out for sure.